thank you so much. I know how very busy you are, so I'm not, I'm going to keep you less than an hour. And what I'd like to do is, our mission at the Black Experience is to tell the stories of successful people of color, to empower and inspire young people and to help eliminate racism. So you are the absolute epitome of the kind of person that we want to talk to and let young people hear from. So thank you for that. So what I'd love to do is I'd love to start with people's foundations, their parents and their grandparents, the people that inspired them, the mentors, the champions, and then talk about how it sort of evolved into business, and then sort of your leadership style. But could we start with growing up and family? Would that be all right?
Sure. I don't get asked that question very often.
Yeah, no, to me, yeah, it really is. I call it the birth of leadership. And
well, I think that you're absolutely correct. I don't know exactly how you would like for me to start, but
well, tell me about. You don't. I know some people women are very sensitive about their age, so you don't have to mention age, but just where were you born, and then just tell me a bit about your family, about your parents and grandparents and things of that sort.
Sure. So I'm not sensitive about my age. I'm actually an age advocate. So I'm 51 years old.
All right.
And my beginnings actually are here in Louisville, Kentucky. Come from a family with a variety of backgrounds, but I would say if you're talking about leadership styles and beginnings and just those mentors and those people who have had a hand in how I guess try to lead in my environments, that would be absolutely my father and my grandmother, both from two different sectors though. My grandmother was a businesswoman here in Louisville, and so I got a lot of I guess my temerity from her, watching her navigate her many businesses and doing it in what I am now understanding, an environment that probably wasn't, as friendly to women. I don't know if I had that appreciation when I was younger, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, but when she got her beginnings in the 40s, it definitely was, something to be dealt with, I suppose. And I didn't really have that full appreciation, and she certainly didn't make it an issue with us, meaning she didn't make a big deal out of it. So we just saw, what we are now not wanting to be, superwoman. We saw a superwoman doing everything. And then my father, I would say, he was just a college administrator here at the University of Louisville, but he
you said he was a college administrator.
College administrator at the University of Louisville, and a former athlete, also basketball player. But he was just a very amazing force, I guess, in my life for just ethical and spiritual reasons. Like he was the one that set that foundation for me, just being a gentle giant that he was. And so with the two of them, a very aggressive businesswoman and a very gentle giant, I think I've become the product of the two of them.
And do you have any siblings, Kimberly?
I do. I have two sisters and one brother.
Okay.
And I'm the oldest by far.
All right. So you were born in what, 71 or so?
Yes, 1971.
Okay. So when you look back on it now, so tell me what Louisville was like sort of in the 70s, your community in terms of socioeconomic status. What was that like? Do you recall?
Yeah. So we were literally, coming off of the civil rights, movement, 68, and all the riots and everything. And I was born in 71. I grew up in the West Louisville end of town, which is the predominantly Black end of town. But it was also, a very multi, I guess, economic, different, just different economic households in the West End. So it was comprised of several neighborhoods, but just to be frank, I grew up fairly middle class in the West End of Louisville, but we were still fairly segregated, I would say, that we were still in our living purposes, we were still, living our residences segregated. And then I was definitely going to school in an integrated environment, but that was relatively new. They were doing busing my first year. I was not bused. My parents actually enrolled me into public school, but into a special program. It's called the traditional program. So I wasn't bused out of my community, but I didn't get to experience that. But many of my friends did, and watching that process was interesting to say the least. But Louisville, definitely was still going through some of its, I guess, integration issues. But for the most part, I would say that, I grew up in a very, very Black environment.
Okay. And in terms of your mother, what did your mother do when you were growing up, Kimberly?
So my mother was an optician when I was growing up, primarily, and then she, sometime when I was in middle school, moved into social services.
Okay. So you talk about your grandmother, and not really, she didn't express hardships or concerns, but you talked about, obviously later on, you really appreciated everything that she went through. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and when sort of in retrospect, when you look back on her, and what is her name? What was her name?
Her name was Alice Smallwood, and really she just never really talked about how hard it was. I mean, she worked all the time. She owned a real estate company. She owned a barbershop, and she did a lot of consulting with churches. She was a musician. So she had like 3 separate businesses that would be going on at the same time, but the real estate being the primary business. And really, it was one of those situations where she was the first Black female to do it in the state, to be a broker. And, right now you can probably name the thousands and thousands of real estate brokers, and, probably hundreds and hundreds of those even in Kentucky right now alone. But at the time that she did it, she was the first. Yeah. And it was, a significant, historical moment. And she, did it as a divorcee. And so one of those things that is she provided for her family, her immediate family, but for the family in general, just greater family. She was the matriarch for the entire family. And, so I was actually watching I think it was the movie for Madam C.J. Walker, and then seeing just all the steps that she had gone through to do her business in a time where, obviously it was very difficult for Black people, but it made me think about my grandmother in those instances where, when she started, probably she couldn't even open her own banking account in her name because she was a woman, and probably all those hurdles that she had to go through. And she literally did not speak of it in terms of adversity. It was always in terms of what she could do to get the job done and to be good at it. And she was very, very positive. So to be honest with you, it's something that when I went into school or even into my professional studies and off into my career, I never really thought about being a woman in that space. I just thought about getting the work done. And I probably didn't even think about it until I was in my mid 30s or so, when I really started to probably see the impact of being a woman in a professional space or even in business as I came to be. So she had that impact on me. So it was just literally, we just get the job done.
So I'm curious, Kimberly, do you know where she got that strength from?
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure where she got that strength from. I do know that she felt very supported, though. She was very supported with her mother and her father. Her father was a pastor, her mother the first lady. And so I know that she had that support system of having them literally with her. So she, even in her older years, as her parents got older, she, purchased a house large enough to house her parents and her children. And they all, including her brother, supported my grandmother and her career, literally, including, when she went to Tuskegee. There were stories about her brothers actually having to support her in Tuskegee. That's how much they believed in her and her efforts. So I'm assuming that, that's what it was, because that's what it is for me. I've always felt supported and loved. And so even when faced with adversity out there, I don't need that affirmation necessarily to come from third parties.
Yeah. Well, that's a great foundation to have, isn't it? I mean, that's extraordinary. And we don't all have that. I feel very, very blessed to have something very similar. But you realize as you go out in the world that there are a lot of people that don't have that kind of support and kind of foundation. So we're very, very blessed. That's fantastic. And when did your grandmother pass away, Kimberly?
She passed away in 1998.
Okay. So you talk about growing up in Louisville. The schools were still kind of segregated, living in a predominantly Black community. Do you remember, I mean, in terms of your parents and maybe even your grandmother, in terms of being political and talking about being Black in America, when did those discussions happen? And if so, when, Kimberly?
They always happened. My grandmother was very political. She was very politically active. And so I can remember as early as 1977, Jimmy Carter as president. I'm only 6 years old, but I know this because of conversations that I would have with my grandmother about politics, watching it on TV. When I was younger, I was one of those kids that was putting yard signs up, as a little, side gig, if you would, because she was always supporting some political effort. And so it was very important. Her barbershop that she had was like a local meeting hub, if you will, for the pastors and civil rights leaders. And so there were always discussions going on there. Here again, another one of those things that I didn't necessarily appreciate when I was younger. I just, I actually, as a kid, just thought it was just a fun place to be. I'll just go and I'm going to hang out, and all of these amazing men were going to, show me love and support. But in truth, I got a lot of my foundation even there at the barbershop, listening to those conversations and listening to them speak in terms of politics and race and next steps. And so it was very much a part of my growing up.
Okay. So in terms of junior high, high school, prior to college, what kind of student were you, Kimberly? What was your interest?
I would say that I was above average for the most part. My interest was always reading and writing, and probably by second grade, I said I was going to be a lawyer, but I wanted to be many things. I wanted to be many things. The first thing I've always wanted to be was a writer, but I also wanted to be a journalist, and I also wanted to be an attorney, and I also wanted to be involved in politics. And they all served a greater purpose to me, the same purpose, which was to basically be involved, being part of the community, and be a part of telling the truth and defending the truth. And I've actually done all of those things.
That's fantastic. So in terms of college, had there been other members of the family who had gone to college prior to you, Kimberly?
Yes. So my grandmother went to Tuskegee.
Okay.
And my dad went to Western Kentucky University.
Okay. So college was for you as the oldest of the three. I mean, for you, there was no doubt that you were going. Would that be a correct assumption?
That is correct.
Okay. So in high school, where are you thinking when it comes down to, you're a junior, you're a senior, where are you thinking about going to college, and have you sort of narrowed down? You said you got 4 things that you really wanted to do, and you've done them all. But what were you sort of thinking, going into college, and where did you want to go?
I wanted to go to Howard, and I did not. And I wanted to major in journalism, which I did.
Okay.
So I ended up going to the University of Kentucky, primarily because I got a full ride. It was very hard to turn it down. And I didn't feel like I should ask my parents to pay for me to go to college when it was already there for me to go for free.
And what drew you to Howard, Kimberly?
What doesn't draw you to Howard? I think that it was literally, I wanted to go for journalism for the most part. Like that, their journalism program was top tier, and I wanted to be at an HBCU.
Okay. So you end up going to the University of Kentucky, which is, I would dare say, quite different from going to Howard.
Very different, I'm sure. I've not been to Howard, but my daughter attends there now.
Okay.
But very different, I'm sure, but very necessary for me. It was a very good experience for me. I got a lot of support at the University of Kentucky. I, got the financial support, but I also got on the road to where I needed to be. So it actually turned out to be a good arrangement for me.
And in terms of the University of Kentucky, in terms of race relations, what was the university like at that time? This would be what, like 89 or something, 89, 90?
Yeah, your math's great. Yes, started in 1989. It depends on who you talk to. Obviously, there was still some strife there. University of Kentucky has a reputation for having some race issues. I didn't experience any of them. Um, I found my own community there and loved it. But I mean, literally, I have nothing but good things to say about my experience at the University of Kentucky.
So I'm going to go back for a second because you talked about your grandmother in particular was very political. And I guess I'm going to ask you in retrospect because obviously you weren't alive for any of these things. But the impact of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Kennedys, you know, President Johnson. In retrospect and hearing from your grandmother, what sort of import were those people, if any, to her and maybe and even to the community there in Louisville?
Well, I would say we were very much a Martin Luther King household. Um, Meaning we were very much a church household. So Martin Luther King's brother lived and had a church in Louisville, and my grandmother was very much a part of that community. So we were very much entwined, I guess, with that line of thinking and philosophy as a family, I would say. Um, I would say after I started doing my own reading and my own exploration of things, that I was a holistic student of the civil rights movement and my thoughts, meaning everybody had their place and role. And so I can't really tell you, Adam, that anyone in the household was, very much advocating one principle or another, or that there was, this. We definitely had a Martin Luther King painting on the wall, like a lot of households, at least in my grandmother's house, we did. But it really wasn't that kind of, express discussion. It was very, very indirect. Everything was all about the action and what was being done. So there wasn't like these lectures that would go on, or, I would, hear these very, very concrete conversations. It was more about the intuitiveness and the feeling that I got in the household by all the things that were going on around me. And really just the involvement, and even with, lots of Black publications always being in the home, always, either nationally and locally, that it was just there to be, I guess, absorbed.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Kimberly. So you're at the University of Kentucky. What do you decide? What do you decide to major in?
Journalism and English.
Okay. And what was your sort of hope there? What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that I was going to be a news broadcaster. I was wanting originally to go in and be an anchor, but I quickly found out that I was not a good candidate for that. Didn't
And
have the personality for it.
really? Why?
I just didn't have a good on-air presence, and it was during one of my internships in Minneapolis that it was just determined that I would probably be a better producer. Like I was a better writer, very serious individual, even at 20 years old when I was there. And so the smiling and I guess being a little bit more personable at what you would need to be on camera was really not my forte. I think that sometime I may have developed the ability to do it, but not before I decided that journalism wasn't going to be what I wanted to do ultimately.
Okay. So you did some producing then.
I did do so
Okay.
very briefly,
Okay.
but yes.
And then so then you decided that that wasn't for you. So then what happened next, Kimberly?
So basically decided that I didn't want to be a journalist. I wasn't really wanting to pry into people's lives like that, ask those kinds of questions. At least I didn't want to do that type of journalism. I think, later on, I kind of found my niche and where I wanted to be, but ultimately decided to go to law school. I was working at Kentucky State University doing PR there, and immediately after school, and just found the courage through a lot of nurturing that in that environment to finally just say, okay, I'm going to go to law school, because up until that point, I was scared to go. And then I just literally was around a lot of incredible people, smart individuals. Um, just decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I applied to go to law school, went back to the University of Kentucky to go to law school with the intent of becoming a civil rights attorney.
Okay. So why do you think, what made you fearful?
I just didn't know if I would measure up. Everyone told me how hard it was. It looked very difficult. There were attorneys that were around me. I worked in the president's office for Kentucky State, and the general counsel, even the alumni director at the time, both were lawyers. And they gave me the courage just from a very subtle, pushing the alumni director more directly. But I just really didn't know if I was that type of student, if I would be that studious enough to be able to become an attorney.
Okay. So you sort of led me into my next question, which is going back in terms of having you again, you talked about the great influence of your grandmother and your father in particular. Were there any mentors or champions when you look back in high school or college? You talked about sort of the subtle pushing and then not so subtle pushing to get into law school. Did you have any people like that growing up, Kimberly?
I think that primarily my family, I was such an introvert. It was more my family growing up. But once I got to college in undergrad, had a great mentor in the journalism program that really pushed me and got me to some very key internships that literally led me to go down the path that was able to go. And then in law school, had an amazing trial coach that saw my talent and just really, really nurtured me into being very good at the trial level. And then after that, even after I left that, I had some others when I went into a different phase of my career that would one individual in particular that kind of served as my father in some ways in my career, just kind of helped me with my strategy because I was very green in the way that I looked at life and was not very savvy in knowing how people move and their motives. And so once I got into, more of a political or government background, that definitely is a factor, and you need to be aware of those things.
Yeah. So you decide that the civil rights, you want to be a civil rights attorney. How long did that last?
I never became a civil rights attorney.
Okay.
I
So what happened?
went into a big law firm situation when I came out. I did my clerkship with a very large law firm here in Louisville, and really changed my life in ways of how I looked at the law and how I practiced law and what my role could be in contributing to the community. There were very, very few at that time Black lawyers at that level working, and I became a commercial litigator. Uh, and that was my area of expertise. However, once I went into my own private practice, I took on quite a few cases that were very much aligned with my original line of thinking. I just wouldn't call myself a civil rights attorney.
So what is commercial litigation, Kimberly?
Commercial litigation, particularly complex commercial litigation, is defending businesses against other businesses, other lawsuits, other contractual or derivative lawsuits, those sorts of things.
And what was attractive to you about that?
I like the complex, the complexity of the levels of that litigation, what it requires of your strategy, of your thoughts. It's not very simple. I tend to gravitate towards things that have many layers.
Okay. And now you said, so when did you start your own law firm?
I started it in 2000. That's a good question. 10, maybe?
2010. Okay. And what was the impetus for doing that, Kimberly?
I was coming off of an appointment with the city. I worked for the city of Louisville under a mayor, and I was coming off of that. And I don't know if you know, but once you get to a certain level, it's kind of where you're going next is looking a little different. And I was very, very young doing it. And so, but I also wanted to be able to do the type of law that I've been wanting to do. And that was very hard to do at a large law firm. I could have great clients from the business sector, but I wasn't able to really help some of those folks that I really intended to help when I went to law school.
Okay. Well, I know in terms of your grandmother, you talked about just getting the job done. But when you look back on it now, getting ready to start your own law firm, being a woman of color, what was sort of that like at that time, Kimberly?
It was very different from being at a large law firm. I can tell you that. When you have a lot of resources and support and a lot of political backing, to be honest with you. So the way that you are viewed when you go into a courtroom, and plus it had been a while since I had been there, but you get asked questions like, who are you? Or you get mistaken for your clients or things of that sort, and that had never happened to me before, to be honest with you. And so it was a little bit different, probably because even in the commercial practice you're not actually in the courtroom that often. It's a lot of motion practice, and so you usually get things settled for the most part via the pleadings that you file. But when I went into a solo practitioner situation, it was a lot of court. I had to learn a lot of things that I had not known before, just because I had been in a situation where there was a clerk to do all the filings, or there was, just even a different level of law that I hadn't even practiced that I'm glad that I did, even though I would say I am still very much a commercial litigator, that is my sweet spot. But I got to take on some cases that really, really help shape my legal practice in a lot of ways, and made me feel really whole because I was able to do some really interesting things. Like I defended one of my colleagues who was a judge at the time from losing his seat on the bench.
Interesting. So you're tasked with learning these new different areas of the law, and obviously you embraced it and you succeeded with it. And if you had to go back prior to starting your own law firm, what might you have done anything differently?
I probably would have done everything differently. I would have done so many things differently. Um, I probably, would have had a better business plan. I probably would have sought out some sort of line of credit to help fund some of those slow times while I was building the practice. But I also would have gotten more help. I really would have gotten more um, administrative and clerical help from the very beginning. That's not necessarily my strong suit. And I think I knew that going into it. But that is, the easy things. Like I said, I like the complex. The easy things, like putting things into the mill and redoing those sorts of things, are very, very hard for someone like me. And I needed a lot of help there. I eventually got it, but I would have had it a lot sooner.
Okay. So how long did you have your own practice for?
I don't know, about 8 years or so.
Okay. So TKT, where does that come into play?
TKT originally was my client. So I got into a really sweet spot into my practice where I was really doing the fun stuff, helping other Black and women-owned businesses, scale and to help them with their legal strategies, and really and in some cases, defend where necessary. And TKT started off as my client with Tiara Kavanaugh. We knew each other from really in political and professional circles. And she just became a client, and then we just grew the relationship from there.
So she was your client, and then at some point you decided to join forces with the company?
That is correct. So started off as a client, and then probably 3 to 4 years in, I don't know the exact timing, we just literally had a discussion where about me coming in, and at that particular time, it was to be the COO of the company. And we had discussions for a while. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to, I guess, come in-house, if you will. But if you knew Tiara Kavanaugh, then you really knew once she asked the question, you were going to be saying yes anyway at some particular time. She already knew the answer, and I appreciated that about her, really respected that. And so ultimately I came in to be the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel. That's what I served as first.
And tell me, TKT, what kind of work did the company do or does?
So TKT is a workforce development company primarily, and is comprised of 2 other companies, Astute Sourcing and TKT Connect. Collectively, we do DEI and supplier diversity consultations. We do talent acquisition and staffing, and we do spend management and managed service provider work.
Okay. And when you made that transition from having your own company to joining TKT, what were were there any issues for you in terms of making that transition, Kimberly?
Yes, not huge ones though. I had a whole lot of respect for Tiara, the founder. I already knew a great deal about the company and its inner workings. My biggest issue is that I had not worked in an office environment for a long time that was not mine exclusively. And so it was really me being having to get acclimated working in a very traditional office. And at that time, TKT had a very traditional office setting. It reminded me of being back at the law firm, and in some ways, just the way that it was set up, and even in the culture. And so for me, that was something to get used to. I had been used to a very, very, very flexible schedule, even at the law firm, pretty flexible. As long as you're getting your work done, that's just the way it is. And while TKT is fairly flexible, it just had a different expectation. So for me, it was just about making that transition. So I slowly made that transition. I came in to the actual office 3 days a week is how I arranged it. And so it was good for me because I am definitely a remote worker for sure.
Yeah. So tell me, how does that, in terms of your leadership style, leadership skills, transitioning from working from a large law firm, having your own practice, being your own boss, now then transitioning to TKT. Tell me about the sort of the evolution of your leadership style and skills, Kimberly, and how it adapts in different environments, or does it adapt?
It has to adapt. There is no way that you can have a stagnant approach in just transfer your style to wherever you are. You definitely have to be an observer of people and appreciate what makes them move. But primarily, I think the transferable part of it is just looking at everyone as individuals, and not as a collective group. Everyone has their own skill sets, their own talents. And so even in between the working my own law firm, while I was with the city, I had a pretty sizable department. So I had several hundred people that were under me at that particular time. And I learned a lot from that experience. And I learned a lot about me in that experience. So I think it was that particular moment when we did the Myers-Briggs was a particularly defining moment for me, on learning a lot more about who and what I am and why people responded the way they did, because I had probably one of the more unusual Myers-Briggs profiles. And so I have probably been altering how I move with individuals ever since, because I am what they call an INTJ. So I'm very, 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 I guess, logical, not necessarily, I'm thinking all the time, but I don't let a lot of emotions get into play. That doesn't mean that I don't feel them. I just don't necessarily allow them to come into play as I'm making decisions and as I'm operating. But that's not necessarily how the rest of the world really works. And so I've had to, accommodate that. And I think going through the pandemic and having to take our operations remotely the way that we did, and to that was just from a work standpoint, that was great for me. I was like, yes, we're working from home. I was very, very, very productive, but that doesn't mean that everybody else was feeling that way. And so it was one of those things where me adjusting not only my leadership style, but just adjusting who I am as a person to recognize that this is probably a pretty difficult time for most people. And you've got to be communicating with people more, probably more than you want to be, because I'm more introverted in nature. But those are the kinds of things that I'm very introspective. So I can make those adjustments as needed. But to answer your question, Adam, making that transition, TKT operates as a corporation, but it also operates as a family. We are very close knit. We didn't experience that great resignation that everyone else is necessarily experiencing as a company. So it is about recognizing what your role is in the family, but as long as you understand that it is a family, then and that team, and we operate that way, then that's how I adjusted my leadership style, because the founder of that particular company definitely saw her team as family. And because I came into the family, I recognized that and tried to continue it with that in mind, obviously making some adjustments along the way as needed. But that's really the core of how I operate. That this is a family, this is a team, and we will, support, nurture, and recognize the talents and gifts of the team.
So I'm curious then, Kimberly, if you're operating the business sort of in regards to we're a family, what are the pros and cons of that versus more of a more traditional work environment?
Well, the pros is that I think that we get loyal employees. That's definitely the pros. Um, and that has helped us, particularly during the time when, like I said, where most people are having a hard time keeping employees. I would say the cons is that we are so close, and a very efficient machine that sometimes we can get too close. Sometimes we can get a little too close, and not necessarily in a bad way, but we are definitely very concerned with each other's well-being. That's for sure. And so, as I'm thinking about it in real time, there aren't really too many downsides, because honestly, it's not as though we're just not making business decisions. We're definitely doing that. We definitely do have a systemic approach to how we do our business. Um, and it's easier to communicate that. I do a one-on-one with everyone, at least once a month, and that takes a lot of time, but it's necessary to know what the pulse of the company and where we are, and what kind of issues are out there. So if I'm really thinking about it, like I said, in real time, I don't think there's too many downsides to that. We give everyone their space for sure, but there is no one that we don't know and can't touch.
Okay. And how many employees do you now have, Kimberly?
We have a core group of 35 in the corporate office, and overall with contingent employees over 200.
Fantastic. Wow. And your role right now is?
I'm the president right now.
So making that transition from chief administrative officer to being president. Tell me, so that's a whole nother level, right? So tell me then about how, again, the continuing transition and the evolution of your leadership, because now you're the boss, right? The buck stops with you. Um, Now you've had that before at your law firm, but now this is different, bigger. What would you say would be the differences from
I
being?
would say that it's more different than anything, and it's a role that I'm very comfortable in. I do like the ability to dictate strategy, to be able to, grow with the team, to um, have a vision that gets executed. But honestly, Adam, I'll be remiss to say in how I got to be the president. That part is not the enjoyable part. So ultimately, I don't know if you're aware, our founder passed away in 2020. And so I actually took the lead, I guess, after that. And I definitely have been known in my time to be a change agent, a manager. And so for those first 2 years, that's what we were doing. Definitely doing a lot of crisis management, not because the walls were falling in necessarily, but there obviously was an unexpected death from our head that we had not planned for. And then all the things that come from that. And that's my sweet spot, to be honest with you, is to be able to manage in a crisis. That is definitely something that I am built to do. So it just came natural for me to get in there, particularly since there were so many legal issues that came with that, or decisions that had to be made that were legally based, that part of it was easy for me. But because I had served in that role as legal counsel prior to, it was just, I was naturally the one that just knew how to do it and where to go and where to begin and to where not to go. And so from that standpoint, very easy. Now that we're not in crisis management, it is really my great pleasure to be able to assist in growing Tiara Kavanaugh's legacy, because she did leave a great legacy. And we've started, new divisions of the company. We started a creative division in 2020 as an extension of the DEI and supplier diversity work that we had already been doing, little scope creeping, if you will, to be able to provide what we call now the continuity of commitment. And the continuity of commitment is when you come to us, you are typically coming because you have some diverse issues that you would like to address, or you'd like to get better at diversity in your particular company. And we've got a full slate of scope of services that we provide. And I don't think we've missed any at this particular point. So we basically kind of turned around how we market ourselves. And particularly in 2020, when not only the pandemic was happening, but we were also having our racial crisis as well, particularly here in Louisville, Kentucky, with the Breonna Taylor incident being very highlighted here. We took a very active role with our Chamber of Commerce, with other businesses, and we developed a new slate of businesses and services to match what we had already had in our DEI and supplier diversity division.
No, that sounds fantastic, and thank you for sharing that. So it's in terms of specifics, though, in terms of your leadership style, and because you have sort of this family environment, how does that work? So, I mean, if you go into a meeting, I know everything has been remote, but if you go into a meeting and you say, okay, I want us to do X, Y, and Z, do you sort of lay it out there and then expect people to go about their business and come back to you with a finished product? I mean, how does that sort of work, Kimberly?
Depends on the individual, depends on the division. Let's just say for the DEI and supplier diversity, the TKT Associates aspect of it, to some degree, it is like that. We have our weekly meetings, we have our weekly reports, everyone has their assignments. We have, performance measurements that are definitely in place. So just because we're in a family environment doesn't mean that we don't have systems in place, but it does very much work that way. I would say that my leadership style allows people to have some autonomy, meaning I be able to do your job without me micromanaging every aspect of it. However, I am involved as much as it seems that I need to be involved, meaning if it looks like it needs more hands-on from me, then that's what happens. If not, then I'll see you at the deadline, and we'll see what we have at the deadline. But it depends on the person. We have people that very much operate very well that way, and then there are others that even if they can do the job without my assistance, need to just have that human touch and talk more and be more engaging. And for those individuals, I have more discussions. We have more planning meetings. We have more analytical meetings. We have that feedback that goes back and forth. So it really is something that is customized for every direct report that I have. And then for those managers that we have in place, I would say they have their own individual styles as well. But we do have those systems and the reporting mechanisms and the performance measurements that really tracks how it all is going and keeps everyone, on task, if you will.
Okay. So with all of your experience, I mean, is there, in terms of leadership style at the top where you are, and the difference between men and women, is there a a difference that you see in leadership styles?
Oh, I don't know, Adam. But I don't know if I can necessarily tell if there's this men and women. I tend to look at it like I just said with the Myers-Briggs or even like a DISC analysis. Those help me more than anything than like gender. It helps me more to know if you're introverted or extroverted. It helps me to know, what your business language, they talk about love language, what your business language is, what your affirmation language is. Those are the kind of things that I tend to look at. So I'm not going to discount the fact that there probably is, a leadership style that is more predominantly male than female. I just don't know that that's the way that I approach it.
Well, thank you. So last question. So tell me, as giving advice to young people, especially juniors, junior high school, even college kids, and talking about trying to achieve their dreams. What are some of the tips that you would like to share or could share?
I would share the tips that I give to my three children, who are definitely in that age group, which is one, be yourself, always be yourself, take advantage of all of your advantages, whatever that may be, and do not be afraid. Don't tell yourself no. Let someone else tell you that. And even when they tell you no, find another way to do it. Basically, it's about having courage, the courage to actually pursue your dreams. I think that most people, that's the first hurdle that they don't ever get over. They do not pursue their actual dreams. They settle or they alter it to fit whatever life is throwing at them. But it's the only life you get. You need to pursue the dreams. And usually when you're pursuing your dreams, you're pursuing your purpose. And so it will come easy to you. I tell my kids that all the time. You will know you're on the right path because it just seems like someone is just laying it out for you. All of a sudden, there is this program. All of a sudden, there is this person. All of a sudden, there is this book, whatever it may be, that gives you the signs that you're on the right path, but continue to pursue your dreams.
Well, actually, I said that was going to be the last one, but I just have to ask one more. Tell me, how are you feeling about where women are, where people of color are in our day and age? Now, are you optimistic about the future?
I'm always optimistic about the future. Am I realistic about the future? I'm always realistic about the future as well. To me, we are in probably one of the most unique time frames that we've been in. We appear to be doing well, prospering. We have more material things, maybe. But in terms of actually growing our wealth, I'm not sure that we are where we were 30 to 40 years ago. If you look at the statistics, I spent a lot of time before as an attorney, and even now in some consultations with Black businesses, and I make the distinction, Black businesses versus minority businesses, because there's just different hurdles that are there. But one of the things that I think, Adam, that I've come to say, talking to these businesses and talking to businesses in general, is that we need to understand that Black businesses are actually contributing to the overall economy. They are not charity cases. They are not just mom and pops. And even if they were just mom and pops, they still are contributing to the overall economy. One of the things that when I took over and running TKT was that it was new to me to be in a position of doing DEI. That was new for me. The diversity space was new for me, but it wasn't hard for me to do because I feel like I've been doing it innately anyway. So the strategy part of it came pretty easy. But what I was surprised to learn was that, you know, if you look at it, and I don't know if I've never ever seen the statistics, but I can see it in practice and all around me, is that Black businesses employ all kinds of people. We subcontract with all kinds of people. Our, you know, professional support are all kinds of people. So when I look at what's going on, it is amazing to me that that seems to be missed in the economy discussion, is that Black businesses are actually fueling the economy as well. So in every way, and I don't think that the discussion goes that way. So I might have went a little left from what your question is that, do I feel like it's getting better or worse? Probably we have a little bit more. I don't know what the statistics are of Black businesses that are out there in the U.S. economy. Until we get taken seriously, though, then we might as well not be in business, because we're not being treated holistically like we are businesses that are contributing to the economy. However, you know, I said originally, I am optimistic. I'm always optimistic. But in reality, we got a lot of work to do still.
Kimberly, thank you so very much for taking time out of your very busy day. It's been wonderful to get a chance to hear your story and your insights. I look forward to getting a chance to talk to you again if I can.
Oh, no. Thank you, Adam, for this opportunity. I enjoyed talking with you.
Wonderful. Well, you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend coming up. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This is the Black Experience for all. If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.